How would you describe Sabrina Carpenter's aesthetic? Retro 60s, 70s, or is it Y2K hyper-femininity? How about Lana Del Rey? Mid-century Americana, late 90s grunge pop, alternative 2010s Tumblr? Charlie XCX, 2000s recession pop, or is it mainstream 2020s pop? What about Billie Eillish? She tends to be seen as a symbol of Gen Z contemporary trends, but even her aesthetic seems right out of the early 2000s skater hip-hop scene. Why does it seem that nostalgia has become mainstream ever since the 2010s? No matter where you look, from Sabrina Carpenter and Lana Del Rey to Charlie XCX and Billie Eilish, everybody seems to be cosplaying a different decade, making the present feel like a mixed mash of the past instead of something uniquely its own. In this video, I want to attempt to tackle this question, exploring how boomer influence has made us all romanticize a period we never experienced, like with Lana Del Rey and Sabrina Carpenter, how we are experiencing a cyclical rise in conservatism, like what occurred in the early 2000s, and also how newer artists that use 2000s aesthetics are just reflecting Gen Z's nostalgia, which has grown in response to mass mental illness in a chaotic, uncertain present world. A couple of days ago, my friend showed me Sabrina Carpenter's new music video for Please 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 with Dolly Parton, and while watching it, all I could think about was one, how she successfully captured Lana Del Rey's mid-century aesthetic but with mainstream success, and two, how drunk we all are on boomer nostalgia despite never experiencing it ourselves. I think most people don't really question mid-century American nostalgia and just assume it's justified due to post-war optimism and America's golden age of capitalism. But one thing I find fascinating is just how ingrained this nostalgia has become in popular culture, making us all collectively view those times in a somewhat romantic, nostalgic light. But obviously, if you're a minority, you probably never would. I briefly touched on this point in my last video, but I think this has to do with two main factors.
Throughout the world, throngs of people hailed the end of the war in Europe.
The decade immediately following World War II set America up for unparalleled material success, with all her economic rivals being completely destroyed and the dollar becoming the world reserve currency. These unique conditions allowed American industry to explode, creating a flourishing middle class and such a high standard of living that has, to this day, never been seen in all of human history.
Mrs. John F. Kennedy
was a fool to let you down.
Such an optimistic golden age is obviously going to be romanticized, but still, I think the mid-century nostalgia we see in popular culture isn't really based on the objective material advantages of those times, but is just a reflection of boomer childhood nostalgia and how it's become immortalized in pop culture due to their massive population and decades-long influence over society. This nostalgia has trickled down to younger generations and can be seen beginning as far back as the 70s with the popularity of the Grease movies, and today is still alive and well with artists like Sabrina Carpenter and Lana Del Rey.
Star, just pretend the ball is a piece of fried chicken.
What was that?
What? Just came to...
Sabrina Carpenter started her career on Disney Channel show Girl Meets World before moving down the child star to singer pipeline and signing with their joint Disney music label. Even though her aesthetic can be seen as empowering and feminist or even just conservative irony, I feel like in some aspects her popularity is a product of the conservative swing to the right in pop culture we see happening right now, similar to what we saw in the early 2000s. In the late 90s leading up to 2001, popular culture was quite liberal, even anti-establishment, with genres like grunge, punk rock, even early hip-hop dominating the radio. The 90s was the decade when Gen X became adults and gained the most influence in youth pop culture, with their generation being defined by angst, disillusionment, and anti-establishment mindsets. The popularity of bands like Pearl Jam and Nirvana, and movies like Fight Club and The Matrix reflected this mainstream suspicion of the establishment and growing widespread sense of dread as the neoliberal policies of Reagan continued to be adopted. Public use of the internet also became mainstream during this time, allowing progressive ideas and underground culture to gain more visibility and influence. The 90s can be defined by an embrace of liberal policies and ideas. at least social ones, because Clinton was economically very right, and a rise in counterculture, nihilistic, anti-establishment sentiment. The 90s can also be seen as the last decade before America had gone completely batshit crazy, embracing environmentalism, recognizing the reality of climate change, and hadn't yet rejected science-based reality in favor of conspiracy and anti-abortion, anti-evolution, pro-fossil fuel religious psychosis. This all radically changed in response to the attacks on 9/11 and the new war on terror. Blind patriotism was in again, and questioning anything the government did would have you labeled a terrorist sympathizer or even a traitor. In popular culture, censorship in the name of decency or even morality became tolerated. Rebellious bands became more toned down in favor of sanitized, non-offensive, Nickelback-like ones. And the re-election of Bush in 2004 solidified this cultural shift. I think what happened in the early 2000s mirrors what is happening again today. In some ways, the late 2000s and early 2010s can be seen as a rebirth of the liberal 90s, with the election of Obama and the widespread adoption of liberal policies like legalizing marijuana and gay marriage. During this time, popular culture became progressive and rebellious in response to conservative fatigue, the recession, and the failure of the war on terror.
You a stupid how? You a stupid how?
Music became bolder and bolder. Artists like Nicki Minaj and Lady Gaga pushed the envelope on what could be normalized in fashion and music. And with the narrow election of Donald Trump in 2016, this trend exponentially accelerated as resistance became mainstream. Mental health and illness had become largely destigmatized. Feminism was seeing a resurgence, and movements like Me Too and BLM reinvigorated conversations on patriarchy and racism.
I don't got no type.
In music, rap and R&B had for the first time become dominant, beating out genres like pop and rock, and it seemed everywhere you looked was a scantily clad female rapper dominating the charts, proudly reclaiming her sexuality. In the beginning of the 2010s, fashion was muted and grungy, but quickly became colorful and experimental, with everyone dyeing their hair multiple colors, cutting it in every which way, and straight men feeling more comfortable doing things like painting their nails or dressing in ways that previously would have been seen as too feminine or gay. Like Bush in 2004, I think Trump's re-election, along with social media oversaturation, is causing another cyclical rejection of cultural liberalism in favor of conservatism, with the rise in clean girl aesthetics, trad wives, normalization of the far right, and just the popularity of bashing and memeing anything seen as progressive or left we see online now. I think in some ways, the popularity of an artist like Sabrina Carpenter is a product of this. But again, to be fair, she does tend to have strong, independent feminist themes in her songs and music videos, which obviously makes her different from traditional conservative aesthetics. But honestly, at the same time, I kind of just see this as a result of the Overton window shifting, with even conservative aesthetics now adopting some form or aspect of feminism, due to the massive success of the social movements and moving the needle from the 2010s. I also think this progressive fatigue has to do with the nature of social media and algorithmic centralization in general. So as we all know, social media fosters this cycle of cultural boom and bust, with trends, songs, even people blowing up and gaining massive exposure and influence, only to fade away as quickly as they appear. This is due to something I call algorithmic fatigue, and how they're really good at picking up on a trend, spreading it everywhere, only to completely abandon it the moment people stop interacting with it due to oversaturation. I think we are seeing the result of progressive cultural fatigue right now, with people feeling it's been played out because tattoos, colorful hair, piercings, and experimental fashion were everywhere during the late 2010s and early 2020s. Now, when it comes to boomer nostalgia, I think one of the most popular celebrity symbols of the mid-century aesthetic is Lana Del Rey.
She wore blue velvet.
Lana Del Rey first burst onto the scene with the viral success of her sulky ballad video games and through the popularity of her sad girl gifs on Tumblr. But where Sabrina Carpenter can be seen as emblematic of the cultural shift towards conservatism and traditional feminine aesthetics, I see Lana Del Rey's popularity as more of a result of economic decline and a rise in mass mental illness. I think it's important to point out that the sad girl and sad boy era of the 2010s wasn't just a trend, but actually reflective of a real-life rise of mental illness that happened and is happening in society. So due to things like a decline in living standards due to neoliberalism and recessions, a rise in dysfunctional families and divorces, school shootings and social unrest, and especially kids growing up with social media, we saw this widespread rise in mental illness and specifically depression. I think the popularity of artists like Lana, Marina and the Diamonds, Sky Fiara, The Weeknd, and later SoundCloud sad boy rappers really reflected this cultural sickness. But the bigger, more interesting aspect of Lana that I don't really see talked about is how the popularity of her nostalgic aesthetic and Paradise Lost themes in her music may have also been reflective of economic and political decline and a longing for the days when America was quote unquote great, at least economically. I now actually think she tapped into something Donald Trump would also tap into, albeit in a more fascist, grifting way. Now, I've talked about Donald Trump plenty of times in this channel, and anyone who knows me knows I obviously don't like the man, and while I can contextually understand why people were led to vote for him, I still, to this day, struggle with incomprehension, even anger and disgust when digesting his apparent political popularity. I struggled to understand how it seemed Trump had tapped into this negative, angry, cultural sentiment that I somehow missed, until one day I realized I didn't. For many of us who don't understand how people could vote for someone who talks so negatively about everything, and especially even his own country, I think it's important to realize that before he ran, it was basically common knowledge that America was experiencing a decline due to things like the recession and regressing living standards. When I'm honest with myself, I also remember being like 13 and watching the Ride music video, feeling that her epilogue really captured this Paradise Lost sentiment. What I heard when Lana said, "I believe in the country America used to be," was a time when a single person could support an entire family on one income and own a home and car. When social security nets weren't some politicized issue in danger of being defunded every other year. When community mattered and small businesses ran society. When progressive movements were the norm and social progress seemed inevitable. While there is definitely a lot of racism, xenophobia, and sexist baggage within Trump's appeal, I still think he was also able to tap into this America is declining sentiment and weaponize it for fascist oligarchic aims. I think my disgust for Trump and incomprehension at his support sort of blinded me to the reality that before he was elected, I also understood that America was clearly a shell of its former self and that we needed radical progressive change. And I see the themes in Lana's early work as reflective of this sentiment as well. From this perspective, I think it makes complete sense why some romanticize mid-century America and the progressive economic benefits it had. But leaving politics aside, I now think Lana Del Rey's mid-century American nostalgia is also emblematic of that widespread Paradise Lost sentiment due to declining economic standards. Now, when it comes to artists like Charlie XCX, I think her late 2000s recession popish sound and aesthetic is reflective of Gen Z's dominant influence in pop culture at the moment, with our nostalgia being accurately captured in trends in music. So like I talked about in my previous video, I think Gen Z is one of the most nostalgic generations for a couple of reasons. One, I think society is literally a burning pile of shit right now that couldn't even be made into an ironic movie due to it being so unbelievably corny and weird. And two, again, the rise of mental illness and how depression can possibly increase nostalgia due to childhoods tending to be much happier and carefree. When we look at Charlie XCX and her latest album Brat, we can see this resurgence in carefree, hedonistic, partying themes, but with an ironic, even existential twist, making her music have a bit more depth than true recession pop, but still, I think it shows how millennials and Gen Z are so disillusioned with how absolutely fucked we are, causing us to indulge in irony, nihilism, and doomerism, or hedonism, consumerism, and vanity. Due to growing up in the information age of being hyper aware of tragedy and societal issues, many of us are just exhausted and want to stop giving a fuck, indulging in escapism and recession pop-like aesthetics and sounds. Now, for those who may not know, recession pop is the term given to the upbeat, electronic, carefree music that gained popularity in the late 2000s and early 2010s following the financial meltdown of 2008. I think if anything is concrete proof that nostalgia is delusional and not reflective of reality, it would be Gen Z's nostalgia. Like, we are literally nostalgic for probably the lowest point of our parents' lives as they grappled with literally the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. But because we were young and carefree, those years are now immortalized in our memories. But what I find even more fascinating about this whole topic is the notion that the internet, and especially social media, has collapsed time, creating a cultural stagnation or a new era where there are no more truly unique trends that define decades, as culture and art democratizes due to algorithms. There are no more mainstream gatekeepers of culture or centralized channels that tell us what's popular anymore, meaning we get to decide for ourselves, leading to people appreciating the past because there is comfort in what is already known, in a sort of diversification and balkanization of culture with micro trends and infinite aesthetics, making it feel like everything and nothing is happening all at once. But I'll save this collapse of time and culture for another video, so subscribe if you're not already so you don't miss that one. Anyways, I just think this rise in nostalgia in music and culture is really just reflective of human nostalgia in general, longing for simpler times due to the complexity of the present, and a rise in mental illness which makes the innocence of childhood seem like paradise compared to the chaos of the present. But let me know what you guys think. Are you sick of the nostalgia? Let me know in the comments, and I hope you all have a good day.